Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Slingshot from levees.org. It's good to see you all again. I wanted to remind you of what our mission is, and that is to cover. Um, I want to remind you of our mission to offer coverage and commentary on the global events which matter most to you, our listeners. And today we're here to discuss the resignation of four levee board commissioners from the post Katrina Flood Protection Authority East. You all know me, Sandy Rosenthal, and today I'm joined by our regular panel, our two guests, Rudy Vorkapik and Stuart Loeb. Rudy, originally from Chicago, came to New Orleans the year prior to Katrina. He founded and produced the satirical newspaper called The Levee with the mantra, "We hold nothing back." Rudy's newspaper is the first to call out the Army Corps of Engineers for being responsible for the flooding during Hurricane Katrina. Stuart Loeb is an engineer who followed Levee.org and the Levee and has been motivated ever since. So thank you both for joining me. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. I'm going to tell our listeners just a little bit about what's going on in New Orleans. It's a big brouhaha. I've got lots of people writing to me, calling me, texting me, and they are worried about this. So let me bring you up to speed. Shane Guidry, on behalf of Governor Jeff Landry in Louisiana, is working with the senator on a plan to tinker with the levee board reform that was passed after Hurricane Katrina. This reform, which was passed less than 6 months after the flooding, did two things. It consolidated the multiple Greater New Orleans levee boards into two entities, the East Authority and the West, on each side of the Mississippi River. And the reform also created a blue ribbon nominating committee that would select who would serve on those commissions. And the goal was twofold. The committee would specifically select engineers and hydrologists and experts, and it took control out of the governor's hands and put it into the hands of a blue ribbon nominating committee that was selected by law, according to a law. The rationale for this change, which was originally spearheaded by Jay LaPierre and the Business Council of New Orleans, was that a levee board composed with experienced personnel not selected by the governor would better serve the population of New Orleans living behind federal levees. Now, the governor wants to alter or abolish that nominating committee and return control to, at the moment, himself, but whoever the sitting governor is. So today, it's not contested that the levees and flood walls failed due to design and construction mistakes by the Army Corps of Engineers. It had nothing to do with the pre-Katrina levee boards. The Corps' own report says the levee and eye walls, the, the Corps' own report says, excuse me, I'm going to try that one more time. The Corps' own investigative report says the levee and eye wall designs for the outfall canals and the industrial canal did not consider deflection due to blah, 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 and hydrostatic pressure, all technical stuff. This is the important part. This resulted in failure of the levee flood wall system at four locations. And these were major, major locations. Okay. These were the biggest, most critical and crucial levee breaks. And it's also contested the East and West levee authorities have no legal authority over the Corps. So my big question is, what's everybody upset about? And that's what we're here to discuss today. The levee boards can't control the Corps. Everything that's being done on these commissions is done according to the Corps' manuals. So anyway, let's open it up. I've talked enough. Um, Rudy, how about since you're the
hmm
first person to call out the Corps, why don't you go first?
Well, I also want to stress to everyone who's watching, anyone who's listening, that this is not just a local issue. This is a national issue because the Army Corps of Engineers has its hand in something by you, without question. So, the strength of the Corps' resolve to do things regardless of what other people say is a national issue. It's not just a local issue, but it's a big issue here because of Hurricane Katrina and everything that happened with Katrina and the levee failures and the responsibility of the Army Corps of Engineers and their fault in what happened with Katrina and the flooding of New Orleans. and so it's an issue that's national and important to everyone. Now it's highlighted here, and we key on it so much because this was the largest man-made natural disaster in this country's history. So that's why it's so important to discuss and to think about on a national level. But we can use it as we're a microcosm for what's happening with the Army Corps. We have been and we will be for quite a while. So, what's happening? Like Sandy said, before the after Katrina, they took the power away from the governor to decide levee decisions because these are politicians and not engineers. So they put it in the hands of qualified people who would only have the opinion to render opinions that have to do with the best quality and the most safety that they could render. Well, now we have Jeff Landry, who sorry, but I refer to as Governor Flanders. But Governor Flanders, to me, is now just reeling all that power back in, naming people who are political appointees, who are industrialists, who have a completely different viewpoint than the previous people who are now leaving there because they are having their legs cut out from under them. Now, where does this go? We don't know yet. All we know is that the aim, at least, perhaps the goals, perhaps the future of the levees and the levee boards are now a giant unknown. Whereas we had a great idea of what was happening, who was in control, and what the recommendations were about. Now we're thrown asunder. We're just thrown asunder. We're not really sure what's going to happen, what the quality is going to maintain, what quality is going to be maintained, and what the goals and ideals are. That's my
Okay.
opinion.
Stuart, your turn.
Yes, my observation around this is that we are seeing a reflection, as Rudy brought up, of the national politics, and specifically our particular governor, who, along with Florida's governor DeSantis, have really patterned themselves to follow closely the policy prerogatives of the current White House. And one of the things that involves is sort of recklessly claiming as much power and control over institutions, agencies, boards. It's happening at the national level, and it's happening here in Louisiana. So you have the baby being thrown out with the bathwater. I won't contest that there's some waste, fraud, and abuse in the government. There always is, but they're shutting down cancer research. And here locally, I think, or at our state level, governor would like to consolidate power for whatever reason over these boards. And in conjunction with the White House, right now the Corps of Engineers has the technical say over the levee system. But with the current DC administration and the close alignment of the current governor with the current president, it's possible that a preloaded levee board could make different decisions that would actually that could actually happen with the current Corps of Engineers, given the current administration and its idea to micromanage everything. Remember, this administration stepped directly into the Corps' purview in California to basically release 1 billion gallons of water as a publicity stunt. So who knows what they would do with the levee? I find the levees, flood control system at large. I can imagine a publicity-related spillway opening that could wreak havoc on the environment, or a delayed opening that could wreak havoc other ways. So those are my concerns. This is the footwork, or could be the footwork, for that type of seizure of control.
So, Stuart, if I may, I listened to everything you said, but my question to you is, even if we had our blue ribbon nominating committee selecting our levee board members, I mean, what would be stopping the president from pulling a stunt like that with the the levy board members that we have now? Really, nothing.
Nothing stops the procedural steps, but to have a levy board that would rise in opposition, as you would hope parts of Congress would
They,
rise, you know.
but it's been non-contested that the levy board cannot tell the order of the Corps what to do. All the levy board can do is comment and wring their hands. There's nothing they can do by legally by law. So my point to you is, even with the current makeup, or prior to all these resignations, the levy board members can't do anything. And I also would counter with, I do think that the levy district of this New Orleans flood protection system would not be so yielding to the president as those California core districts. There's core districts. There's not one core, there's districts. And this
Right.
district is in control of one of the fifth largest port in the world. And I have a hard time imagining that the Army Corps of Engineers would do a publicity stunt that would in any way harm our ability to get ships in and out of that port. So, good points. But this is a complex issue, and when
Well,
issues are complex, that's when it's really easy to pull the wool over people's eyes.
well, that's just it too. If we have a levy board that's independent and speaks independently, when something like this happens, that's where the truth is going to come from. And with a levy board that is subservient to the entire system, it's never going to happen. They're going to be lockstep with the administration if the administration decides to do something that we all know is detrimental to the health and safety of this entire region.
Yeah, but
So,
keep
I
in
mean,
mind, excuse me, that Rudy, that they can't do anything. They can only talk.
but you know what? Sometimes you need to. The word has to come from someplace. So if it's only coming from us, and it's not even a registered board, and if it's a board that's in lockstep with the governor, in lockstep with the president, if these are the people who make the decision to do something that we know is wrong, there's somebody in an official capacity who's saying, no, don't do this. But now you have to believe that's not even going to exist. So I understand what you're saying. They can't do anything. But now, in my opinion, they're going to even be able to say even less.
Yeah,
They,
Sandy, you're
they,
drawing a line around a technical point. That's very true. The levy board does not have the jurisdiction, but they do have a capacity to inform the public and to shape the argument. And I think Landry would like to get that out of the way. So where if there is any point of contention, that the levy board will pose no problem to him on either side of the river,
The levy board has spoken up on several issues over the past 20 years. The reform levy, they were screaming that the current 100-year protection levy protection wasn't enough. And they were right, but nothing got done about it. They were screaming about, remember the big oil lawsuit? Okay, they were saying that we need to sue the oil companies. That didn't go anywhere. So I just given you two examples where they screamed a lot and nothing got done. But they can scream and they can go public, but they can't do anything. Keep in mind that when the Army Corps of Engineers build a $16 billion flood protection system, they don't just hand it over to the local levy board and go, here you go. Here you go. Have at it. They have to follow the instructions of the Army Corps of Engineers to the T. And if they don't, the Army Corps of Engineers can come in and give the levees a grade of unacceptable and decertify the levees, and no one can get flood insurance. So that's just not going to happen. Even the Army Corps of Engineers is in a position not to let that happen.
Right.
They would start screaming that the local levee districts aren't maintaining the levees. So, which brings me to the governor has stated without evidence that the current levee system isn't being properly maintained. Well, believe me, there's only one entity that can make that determination, and that's the Army Corps of Engineers, and they haven't said a word.
And
So
they
I
likely won't. And they
and
likely won't because again, they're under the thumb of the administration. So I mean,
who's under the
just
thumb of the administration?
every single federal agency that exists right now is under the thumb of the administration. Just like I agree with Stuart wholeheartedly. And even in the examples that you had noted about the big oil lawsuits and the levee protection not being adequate, At least we had someone saying that. We did, and we fought it, but we were the small guys. We were the little guys. We're New Orleans. We know, a lot of times it is true that the locals know better than the big guys. And in that case, we certainly did. We certainly knew what we needed, what was required, what was coming, what the future holds. So instead of
What do you mean
500-year flood,
we knew what needed to be done? I'm
well,
sorry, I'm not
instead of
following.
we knew that climate change and rising sea levels are going to affect the weather and are going to affect the pressure put on our levees. So we knew that we needed that at very least we needed 500-year storm levee protection. We got 100-year storm levee protection, which now occurs probably 3 times a year.
But that was not determined by the Army Corps, it's determined by Congress.
Right, and that's but
Congress.
that's all in locks. Right, exactly. But
Eh,
at least, but I understand that. But we were all yelling, yelling, yelling.
We were.
But that's what we got.
But my
But that's
point
what
is,
we
there's
got.
nothing we can do but yell. And Garrett Graves is on
Right.
record saying the new reform levy board members are nothing but bystanders. When that $16 billion system got built, there's nothing the levy board could do to make any changes to it. And they did. They had suggestions, and they're all recorded, and they're all put in a database, and the Corps just ignores them. And there are levy members, most notably at the moment, Stephen Estopanol, who served for 8 years on the board, and two of them as president when you have to be elected. So he was a respected member of the levy board, and he is on record saying, doesn't matter, Corps is going to do it at once. And he has some interesting lines about that on just who you can have on the levy board, and it will be just fine. But that's in an opinion piece that's going to be coming out in a couple of days, so I don't want to steal Mr. Stopanol's thunder. But at the end of the day, as long as you have intelligent, honest people on the board, this levy system will be protected. Now, that's when you get into, well, how do you know the governor is going to choose honest people? How do we know the governor is going to do that? Somehow, over the years, the word politically appointed became a dirty word. That anybody who's politically appointed by a politician, it's got to be corrupt. And I'm not sure when that happened, but it's an assumption these days. There's a lot of politically appointed positions in America, and they can't all be corrupt. It's a
Well,
loaded term.
No,
also, sure, political appointment is a dirty term, but what is the term that has become the norm? Disinformation. So that's what's really happening here is the same thing with Jeff Landry saying that everything's going to be great, everything's going to be wonderful. All the disinformation is coming out of Doge. The number, even the amount of money that they're supposedly saving, is a complete lie to what is actually happening. It's a disinformation campaign to offset reason, because when you have to fight the inane, when you have to first counter the inane, by the time you get to the meat and potatoes of what you're trying to get to, they're on to another subject. And they're already, so it's just disinformation is really the word that I think is the key one for these times.
I'm in
let me go
agreement.
back. Let me
Okay,
go back to a
you
couple
go
of
ahead,
points.
Stuart. Yep.
Couple of points here. First, that the districts are indeed different. The core districts are divided geographically and administratively across the United States, and we are not in California's district. But if you'd gone back a year ago and said that we will have a politically motivated release of water for a press event so that the president can stand behind a podium and say, "Look at all that wonderful water that would have put out the fires had I done this a week ago. We'll never let this happen again." All the BS basically that came out of that. If you had said that a year ago, people would have said, "Oh no, the California Corps management would never, that district management would never have done that." I can see that the same thing could happen to our district just from an executive order or an edict coming from the White House. Go do this because it looks good. And the other thing I want to point out is there's a lot of hardware and contracts and pumping systems, floodgates, all these technological expenses and capital has to go into the levee system. And if Elon Musk, the co-president, starts sniffing around and finding those things attractive, well, maybe we'll start seeing the boring company be the prime contractor on levee work that they have no business being in. So I do have worries about what seems to be an insignificant change or something that won't have long-term effects. I worry about a levee board that won't be able to at least point that out and bring the media and bring the public along to counter disinformation. That's my concern.
Well, I
Yeah.
think you raise an interesting point, keeping in mind that there's nothing they can do; they can only talk, and hopefully they would talk. And it's possible that yes, a stunt could be pulled here. I have a hard time imagining the local core district bowing to that, especially since this district has a big history to it. But with referring to the levee breach event 20 years ago, and I also agree that this is happening because of the current Washington, D.C. administration. This would not have happened if it weren't for that. It'd be a moot point. What I'm trying to say is, I've already stated this publicly, I would rather have our levy board get selected by a blue ribbon nominating committee than by the governor, any governor. If you ask me, I would prefer that. But I also have said that if we go back to the old way, it's going back to the old way. The old levee boards were irrelevant in the flooding of New Orleans. And this idea that putting experts on the board would change anything is demonstrative of people that don't understand what a board does. A board, you don't have experts on boards to micromanage the what's going on. Boards do board work. And as far as people being concerned about there being no engineers or hydrologists on the board, well, that's what the $70 million budget is for. There's a $70 million budget where if the board feels they need some engineering advice, they contract with them. And I can give you a long list of contractors who do work for the levee board. Engineering contractors. They have all kinds of contractors. That's what they do. One of the things they do with that $70 million. So, so my point is, oh, and there's more. There's staff engineers. There are staff. The levee districts have staff engineers that have been working on those districts, many of them for decades, tons and tons of institutional knowledge. Those engineers are also tapped, and those experts are tapped in the maintenance of these levees, which is all done according to the manuals that the Corps gives them. So again, bottom line is having experts on the board is really it's an assumption. It's an assumption with no proof that is
Right.
what needs to be done to keep our levees in good working order, which is only maintenance operation, no construction, no design.
But let's wait now and see what happens. And that's all we can do right now is and see what happens to those staff engineers and see what happens to the people who have been there for years. Because look what's happening in the rest of the government. All of those people are being knocked out of their jobs. They're all being taken out and replaced with political appointees who are absolutely beholden to do whatever they're told. And that's the danger because that's where it comes from. It's starting from the top, and this is the real trickle down effect. This is a trickle down effect that actually does what it describes, not taxes, but this is the trickle down from the top. Edicts where everyone has to be loyal to one person, loyal to one entity, and it is just absolutely moving down like a big, bad current of water that can't be stopped.
There's no question that the governor's moves eyeing this levee board has to do with control of that $70 million. He already tried to get his hands on the CPRA's $1 billion budget, a billion every single year. It didn't work. His efforts fell flat. He has so much pushback, and I think we realized it was harder to do than he thought. So we backed off on that. So now he's got an eye on this $70 million budget. But I continue to say that even if he does manage to get his own appointees There's nothing they're going to be able to do because nobody tells the Army Corps of Engineers what to do. And again, if we lose our certification of our levees, accreditation of our levees, then we're all in big trouble, and that would be the governor's fault. I have a hard time imagining that the governor would want to be the reason that the all of Greater New Orleans can't get flood insurance. And in closing, I want to add that my real concern here is that the pre-Katrina levee boards are still being blamed for the flooding when they had absolutely nothing to do with the pre-Katrina flooding. There's this idea that had we had experts, is an assumption that had there been experts on the pre-Katrina levee board, that this flooding wouldn't have happened. There's nothing to support that. It is an assumption that comes out of people that don't know what they're talking about. And and if you understood how all this worked, you wouldn't say such a thing. So that's my concern. I
Yeah,
I don't like those 125 people who've served on the levee board being blamed for the flooding of New Orleans when it wasn't their fault. That's it.
it was a flawed design from the beginning that was launched by the Army Corps of Engineers. They simply didn't put the sheet pilings down far enough. They were building in the marsh. When they replaced it, they went down almost double with the sheet pilings. There's no question whatsoever who is to blame. It was a faulty design from go. It was a time bomb that was just ticking, ticking, ticking.
And that's what, thank you, Rudy. And that's what bothers me. That focus, talk about focus, that focus is on the wrong place. Focus is on the pre-Katrina levee boards who were blameless. And anybody that tries to say, oh, if I was on that pre-Katrina levee board, I wouldn't have let the Corps build the way it did. It's baloney. The pre-Katrina Corps doesn't even share what they did with the levee boards because they were in charge of maintenance. Why would the Corps, with the 200 years of experience and sterling, and keep in mind, prior to Katrina, the Army Corps had a gold-plated reputation. And so you're talking about people, these. So this is the Army Corps of Engineers that had, prior to Katrina, built thousands of miles of levees along the Mississippi, Missouri, and Ohio, capable of withstanding storm surges of 20 feet every single year for a month or more. Okay, so why wouldn't the pre-Katrina levee board be concerned about a few miles of drainage canals? That's what broke. Drainage canals that were only supposed to hold a few feet of water for a couple of hours, and not every single year. So why it would have been ludicrous for the pre-Katrina levee board to tell the Corps, oh, you can't build that, it's not going to work. No, and again, and even if they did, even if they had, the Corps would have said just what they say now. We'll take it under advisement and then go build what they're going to build.
There you go. And now that's probably going to get easier.
Well, the system's built now.
No, but
The
I mean,
system's
for
built.
any other project, any other place, any other time.
I'm sorry, excuse me.
I think that's going to, but I mean, I understand our system is built, but there's other systems that they're working on. There's other things that are always going to be happening everywhere. And I just, it seems that it's just going to be easier for them to dictate what they want or what is demanded of them. Because I do believe that every single federal agency right now is answering to a higher voice specifically. And Congress, I mean, we're not even passing laws anymore. Everything is an executive order. There are no laws on the books. Everything he's doing is a stroke of a pen. That if there's a change in the administration in 4 years, can be undone with the stroke of a pen. There's no law. No one's voting on anything. No one's being held to account by having to raise their hand and saying yes or no. It's all being dictated, and that's another just method of upheaval, because you destroy these things with the stroke of a pen, and to put them back together again is, it's a Humpty Dumpty situation. So that's the situation that we're in right now, and that's what's being done. Things are being dismantled with ink and a signature, and no one that we voted for locally, from Senate to the House of Representatives to anywhere, is having to stand up and actually cast their vote and be held accountable for that. They can all deflect to the man with the pen and the man with the pen doesn't care.
Stuart, do you have anything else to add on this?
Yeah, just a quick point. I would say in the coverage of the Atlantic editor mistakenly being included in what looks to be an illegal classified chat on an unclassified platform. That's the big story nationally right now. In the depths of that, you had J.D. Vance pushing back on the methods that they were planning to go into this action with. And I was mildly encouraged by the fact that, well, at least he's still raising objections in private. And should there be a change of the administration, given the age and of the current president, that if Vance were to take the reins, I have a glimmer of hope that we would move away from this legislation by executive order on the whim of one man back to something more recognizable as what we all grew up with, which was the three branches of government and division of power. So that was a very small glimmer of light in that whole story. And that would reflect back on, say, the way the Corps is managed and the way federal agencies are managed in general, that maybe this would be, it wouldn't be as bad as it is today, where it's the whims of a billionaire businessman and the endorsement of his sponsor, who's actually the president of the United States.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Stuart.
yeah.
Thank you, Stuart. I just want to add one last thing. The post. I want to add one last thing. The post. Oh shoot. Okay, no problems. I thought I had a little problem with the video. Everything's fine. The post Katrina levee authorities with experts on it and a nominating committee. This is the only levee district in the entire country that has a law that you have to have experts, engineering experts on its board in the entire country. There's 144 in Louisiana alone. So 50 states, thousands, I'm not very good at math, 50 times 144. And California has a lot of districts. We're the only one in the country that says we need to have experts on our levee board. So,
I'm awfully glad it's us.
well, and as I've stated before, I don't think boards should have engineering experts on them. I think boards should be engineers should be consultants and staff, but
Who do you think
engineers.
should be on the boards then? Should that be a political appointee, or where are we? Where would you be going with? Who would you like to see on such boards?
I'm glad you asked. Project managers, money managers,
Sure.
because that's what they do. They manage money. They manage a $70 million budget. That's their job. And they make decisions every day, and making sure that the money gets properly done. They have a finance committee. That's what they do. They're board people, doing board work. And I don't think you'll find anybody that would say that in general. I don't like to. A lot of my good friends are civil engineers, but civil engineers don't necessarily make good board people. Okay.
Sure.
So that's why I'm pointing that out. But I will say this, that I would rather have a nominating committee selecting our board members than our governor. That's at this time. I'm not sure I would say that forever, but certainly at this time, that's what I would prefer. And I'm on record as saying this out loud. But I'm also stating that even if the governor managed to dismantle the nominating committee, we'll be okay, because by law, the levee board has to do what's stated in the Corps' operation and maintenance manual. They have to. It's a federal law. It's the job of the sponsor. And I don't want to be the first to find out what happens if they don't. But that's what would happen if the levee boards didn't do their job, which is to manage the money and keep the levees maintained. The board don't go out and inspect the levees. The levee districts do that. And I also point out one more thing. Had this levee board reform never happened, ever. If we could rewind the clock and say no one thought of, the business community didn't think of this levee board reform, they're the ones who first came up with the idea, that the maintenance and operations would be going on exactly as it is now, exactly the same. Nothing would be any different because it's all dictated by federal law. There's the federal sponsor, the Corps, and the local sponsor, the levee district. So,
Let's say if they wanted to like reopen the Mr. Go spillway or the Mr. Go, which is the Mississippi River Gulf outlet that was responsible for a lot of the storm surge that came in during
it
Hurricane
exacerbated it,
Katrina.
yes.
It exacerbated it, and so let's say that and after Katrina that was cut off, so that is now rocked, it's dammed, and it has no flow, and it cannot be breached or it shouldn't be breached. And let's say the new levee board person who is a political appointee of the governor who runs a marine company, who is beholden, who does oil and gas work and is a marine operator, and it is beholden and has made his fortune with those folks, says, hey, let's open that up again. And you had a levee board that said, okay, that's great because they're all political appointees. In my mind, if you still have an independent board, at least somebody is saying something of some rationality, and you have to start someplace.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because I did want to add a point about on that exact thing. But first of all, the Corps would say, we'll take it under advisement and do nothing. Okay. However, I do want to point out, though, that all the levee board meetings are public. So, what if all those people worried about this just start going to the meetings and start watching what's going on and listening? And I can tell you, I've gone to a lot of levee board meetings. They love when members of the public come because all these people are serving pro bono. These people can get hundreds and hundreds of dollars in consulting fees. They're working for free on this levee board. They love when members of the public come and pay attention to what's going on. Well, we can keep doing that if Governor Landry abolishes the nominating committee. So it's gone from just assuming that the levee board's doing everything right to now it's in our hands, and we can go to these meetings. Roy Arago has been to every single levee board meeting since Katrina in 2005. And so we just need to get some more Roy Aragos out there. So all of that
Well,
lost when we as a public can start paying attention, and we as a public can scream
well,
just as loud
right.
as the levee
Well,
authorities.
the thing though is that depending on if this goes south with what's happening with these appointments, those boards may not be so keen on public comment anymore.
I think
And
if it's by law they have to.
well, you know what? There's a lot of laws that aren't being followed right now.
Yeah, I was going to add to that, say, Sandy, you're putting a lot of faith in people following the federal law. I would look at California once again. It's like, was that in their manual? Releasing water from reservoirs to ostensibly fight fires, well, the water ended up 100 miles away. That was nowhere in their operating procedure, and they had to do it on executive order. So
And
that kind of stuff could happen to us.
But all they can
and
do
it,
is scream. They
But
can't stop them.
but that's all we did. That all we've ever done is scream. That's what we've done, and we've brought attention to a lot of different things in our
True.
past. And
Right. But my
you
point
can't
is,
always
you can't
right.
control what they do. You can only draw attention to see what they're doing, but you
But
can't
that's where it
stop them.
begins. But that's always where it begins
That's
for
true.
anything, for everything. People talk about idea. Every idea starts out as a dream. You know what I mean? Every idea starts out as, oh my gosh, I have this idea. I have this dream of what this can be. And then it becomes a fully formed idea, and then it becomes actionable, and people do things about it. But it has to start as a nugget, and then it has to grow into a big old beautiful oak tree if it's going to be successful, or a big old ugly one. You never really know which way it's going to go.
So, Rudy, do you
So,
think the governor will be successful in abolishing the nominating committee?
oh, absolutely. I think there's no question about it. I think that he's got the political capital. He's got we are in New Orleans. We are without question a blue dot in a red sea. And so yes, he's got control. This is one of those states that is controlled by the red states, and it's just the way it's going to be for now. We had a reprieve. We had some reason over the last 8 years. I didn't agree with everything the last governor did. I agree with a lot of what he did. This one, I haven't come to agree with much. And
Yeah.
that is, again, not a political observation, but just a rational one. So, no, I think he's going to take these boards, rip them up, and do with them what he will.
Stuart, what do you think?
I agree with Rudy on that we are moving into a new phase. Our governor is modeling himself after the administration. And so if you want to see the playbook as how the Governor Landry is going to proceed with the management of this, just look at the federal government, how they're managing agencies, how they're dismantling agencies, how they're repurposing agencies, such as the Environmental Protection Agency. Look at that, and that's going to be your roadmap for what's going to happen in Louisiana.
And
Okay.
it does go back to disinformation, and it's the onslaught of it that makes people numb to where do I start to speak, and it gets frustrating because there are so many fights to be fought that where do you begin? And we all have busy lives and people have things to do, but where do you start with something like that? Because there's so many fires to put out, seemingly.
It's interesting that the exact same reason this levy board reform got passed is probably going to be the reason that it gets undone, is because we're a blue dot in a red state. That's how all this got passed in the first place. And this wild assumption that the levee boards were responsible. And even if you lived in Baton Rouge, you were affected by the levee breach event. The whole state was affected negatively by this levee breach event. And so it's for that exact same reason, it will probably get abolished. But I'm also going to go on record as saying it just isn't, we're going to be okay because the core controls, the core rules. And presidents have been saying for 100 years the core has too much power. So they're going to have to be major and had no success in taking power away from the core. So, like as I said, the core rules, the flood protection here in New Orleans, and unless major changes are made to the Army Corps of Engineers, I remain confident that we'll have a robust levee system to live behind in the city of New Orleans. So, unless anybody
I
else has
agree with
anything
that.
further to add, yes,
Yeah, so
Stuart.
I say I agree with you on that. It's the least of my worries, or the lesser of my worries, in the current political situation. That the core is going to be substantially affected by the current administration. There's so many other things that are happening, particularly university research. We could go a whole episode on all of this other stuff, but this particular issue, I'm not that terribly worried about.
But one of the major issues I see being reported on more now is what happened to us last year, and that's saltwater intrusion with rising sea levels.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what happened to us, and don't forget, is the Corps that dug out the mouth of the Mississippi River, allowing more intrusion closer to the cities, which is why we may have been affected as largely as we were when we went through a drought last summer, where the salt water came up the Mississippi River and our water supply was genuinely threatened. And now coastal cities around the country are seeing that this is an issue that they are facing. So we again were we were the petri dish for the rest of the country. And I say it all the time. It feels to me like it's a broken record, but what happens here, what happens in the world, seems to happen in New Orleans first. So
On
Rudy,
that
in the
note,
Corps' defense, and in the Corps' defense, I will say they did build an enormous underwater dam that did impede the progress of the saltwater wedge. So
right, but they
kudos
also
to the Corps for
dug all
that.
that out. But they also dug all that out, which made the dam necessary, right?
Right.
yeah, we need 2 hours for this show,
Right.
but and I will save that for another show, saltwater intrusion, which hopefully doesn't happen again this spring, like it did last year in the summer. It was a summer thing. So, well, thank you, gentlemen, for joining me. This has been, I think, a rollicking discussion. I kind of like it when the three of us are not all on exactly the same page. It makes for an interesting conversation, and I love conversations. So, thank you, Rudy. Thank you, Stuart. And thank you, the
Thank you.
listeners, for joining us today. I hope you liked this episode. Now, be sure to like, subscribe, and rate the podcast, The Slingshot from Levee.org, on all of your favorite platforms. And remember, we need to see you again soon. Bye for now. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.